So in this walkthrough, I am going to walk you through a couple of the reports that we use within GA4 when looking at Google Ads data. It's important to note here that I am using the demo account. If you've been here before, you know the demo account has some pretty significant limitations. In the slides Jeremiah is going to go through later, he's going to use some anonymized real client data to show you what these reports might actually look like with you, whereas I can show you live how to actually use them. So the first report that we like to look at is if you come in here to your advertising section and go into advertising snapshot. Now, GA4 can be really customized. However, if you don't see this advertising section in your left sidebar, it's probably because you do not have your Google Ads account linked to your GA4 account. In order to do that, you're going to need to go into your settings and link those. Only takes a couple of minutes, but some people have reported that without linking them, they're unable to see this entire advertising section. If you're having any trouble figuring out how to link those, please feel free to reach out to us for help with that. Now that I'm in this advertising snapshot, this is just your overview. Like the other reporting areas where it says snapshot, this is just your only have a moment or two, only going to take a quick look. What am I seeing? So in here, we can just see some channels, some conversions, key events, if any insights have been set up in the account here, and what touch points do customers take to convert as well in this snapshot. Another report that we at Inflow like is the Attribution Paths report. This report is really where you can see how many touch points to a key event, formerly known as conversion, happened within your GA4 account. Unfortunately, in Universal Analytics, you were able to see that assisted revenue number. And while this is probably the report that you would think you would be able to see that in GA4, GA4 unfortunately did not carry that feature over from Universal Analytics, which is a bummer for a lot of people I know. So if you're looking for that in this report and you can't find it, unfortunately, it's not here. They didn't carry that around. Within this report, I can change my channel group if I have perhaps customized channel groups set up in order to better meet some data definitions. I can use that. I can also look at source, medium, campaign, and I can also change the attribution model here as well. In earlier versions of GA4, there used to be a lot more attribution models that were available. And in fact, we'll be talking a little bit more about these in a few minutes. But here we can see that I can do paid and organic channels, data-driven, last click, or is Google just paid last click? And when I change that, the data will change as well. So in here, I'm going to leave this as data-driven. Again, down here, I can change what dimensions I'm looking at, and I can change these sorts as well. The next one that we look at, and Jeremiah is going to be talking a lot more about, is this Attribution Models path. This report is really, really great when you are looking into what difference changing your attribution model makes on your data. So in this demo account, we can see here that we have last click and we have data-driven. This is the default. We can see our total number of key events and our total number of revenue remains the same. However, there can be some slight differences in this example, although Jeremiah is going to show you why this can be a lot more impactful. Here we can see 39,000 versus 38,000. Again, not a huge difference, but there can be times that changing your attribution model in the back end of your GA4 will have a really significant impact on your data and on your reporting. So really important to keep an eye on this report if you're considering making those changes. Another report that we really enjoy is if you come here under planning and go into all channels. This is really looking at your key events, your ads cost per ad clicks, and total revenue, and your return on ad spend across your channels. Now, obviously with direct, we expect to see 0. However, if you are using a variety of Google products across different advertising channels, this report can be a great place to get a snapshot of that. Going into your Google Ads account is going to provide you with a little bit more detail, but this, again, can be a really good overview to see how that's working with the rest of your channels all together. Again, can sort in here and can change the different dimensions depending on what I am looking for. Moving on, depending what Google products you have linked, in this case, display and video and Google Ads, you can also dig a little bit more into that. That demo account doesn't have great Google Ads account. So this is the other GA4 demo account, which also has a lot of the issues we have talked about before. But in this case, I can break this down into campaigns. So I can take a look at my key events, ad cost, etc. by campaigns. Also can pull this up, look at it by campaign ID, ad group text, keyword text, etc. Google Ads query can also be something you look at here. Important to note that when you do this, sometimes these take a really long time to load. You're trying to pull a lot of data into your GA4. We all know GA4 load time is not the best to begin with, so can sometimes take a moment. This can also be really great if you perhaps don't have access to a ads account and you're kind of trying to look for an idea of perhaps what queries people are searching for and how users are getting to that. Again, if you're really trying to dig in, I personally would recommend getting more into the Google Ads account as opposed to just this GA4, but this can be a really great place to start that analysis. And then finally, another one that you will see talked about a fair amount is this new advertising segments report. This report is brand new, and this report is really looking at your GA4 audiences that are synced with other Google products for remarketing and ads. This is just kind of giving you an idea of what's available there and if it's something you can look in further. Again, this is just a snapshot of a starting place to give you more data for when you start to dig in more. That being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can get into the deck and talk a little bit more about how we use these not with the not great demo account data.
All right, so jumping into the differences between data-driven and last click, we'll show you a couple different reports here from a real client of ours. Well, we've hidden their personal details, but just to show you just the main differences and what you should expect from data-driven and last click. Most of the accounts that we manage for Google Ads use data-driven attribution, so we can assign credit to different touch points along the purchase journey. But most of your GA4 points are going to be using last click. So it typically defaults to the last non-direct click. So if there's 5 or 6 clicks in the path and the last one is a direct source, it'll default to the previous one, whether that's organic, email, paid search, etc. Additionally, the main differences between these two are going to be the data-driven will distribute parts of the purchase and parts of the revenue to different channels along the way. So in this first example, you'll see CPC and the email flow both receive partial credit for the sale, whereas using last click attribution, organic received 100%. If you want to look into how to configure the different attributions, we can just jump to the next slide. Here is how you can see your different settings. So go into your attribution settings and you can toggle between data-driven and last click. If you were a fan of UA, if you were around long ago, you would see probably 5 or 6 different attribution models, including first click. Some were using linear, some were using position-based, and you can actually assign credit to the first click and to the last click. With GA4, we're currently just left at 2 different options, data-driven and last click. So to access the 2 different reports that Julie was showing in the example, the bottom button on the left is your advertiser. Click on attribution and then go ahead and click on attribution models. This is data from a client of ours from earlier this year. And at the very top level, you'll go ahead and see that both of them had same number in revenue and same number of key events. Key events for this include purchases, contacts, add to carts, and some other specific events for this client. At the very top level, again, the revenue is exactly the same, but as we look a little bit closer at the different channels, you'll actually see that some of them are lining up very closely. So direct, email, and paid social, the revenue is exactly the same down to the penny. However, there's very, very slight discrepancies between the key events. You'll see 0.06 for email, 0.05 extra for social. And that's because somewhere along the click journey, somewhere along the purchase path, the data-driven attribution is saying 0.06 of a purchase is being attributed to email or 0.05 is being attributed to paid social. You don't see these with last click, again, because all of the sale is being attributed to the last touch point, whereas data-driven, again, is dividing up part of the conversion, part of the purchase event into different channels. If we go to the next slide, we'll see just some slight discrepancies. Again, here, cross network is showing about a $500 difference and about 5 extra key events when looking at data-driven. Whereas on the opposite side, organic is actually showing fewer purchase and fewer events when looking at data-driven. So in these cases, it's likely that some of the purchase events that were being attributed to organic search as last click actually received less credit when looking at data-driven, and some other channel was receiving more credit. For the cross network, they received less credit on last click and then more credit on data-driven. We do have one example here where there's a huge discrepancy, and that's for paid search. So this client received one massive order for $14,000. And based on last click, paid search didn't receive any. However, looking at data-driven, paid search actually received quite a large portion of credit for this. The way we determine how much value is being assigned to each of these different channels is actually by looking at your attribution paths. So jumping into the attribution paths report, you can see how much credit is being attributed to each purchase path. So these aren't individual purchases. These could be multiple purchases. So line 2, for example, there's 102 key events where there was no source, there was no medium. Whereas in line 3, there were 48 key events that occurred when there were 2 organic touch points. So all of these that we have highlighted here are purchases made from a single event. So one organic search, one paid search click, or there was no defined medium for traffic. And all of this purchase revenue should match up very, very closely, if not the exact same, for data-driven attribution and for last click attribution, because there's only one touch point. If you look at the examples where there are multiple touch points and you look real closely, you'll see there are percentages being attributed to different touch points. So again, looking at last click, organic, and email would have received all the credit for these. However, looking at data-driven, we can extrapolate that different percentages of these events were being attributed to different channels. So that's why when you look at your overall reports, you'll see half a percentage of a conversion, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, etc. That's because a portion of the event is being attributed to a different channel. In this very last example, in row 10, you'll see that paid search had 4 different touch points on it. Organic had 4, and then 6 separate email touch points occurred, where this is saying, hey, email is going to be receiving all this credit. Even though there are several touch points for paid search, several touch points for organic, we're not seeing that credit being attributed. So this is where you got to put your marketing cap on and say, paid search is very clearly a part of the purchase journey. Organic is very clearly a part of the purchase journey. Even though email received the final credit when looking at last click attribution, it's still very important to know that paid search helped start the sale, helped drive the sale. Organic results helped bring the customer back, do some more research, and so on. So when we look at these paths reports, we want to make sure we're looking at what channels have a lot of impact, what channels have a lot of touch points, and are ultimately resulting in a sale at the end of the day. I don't look at the last click report to determine where to put your budget towards. I usually will look at the path report to see where are all the touch points coming from, how much impact does each channel have, how much impact do all these different platforms that you're using and advertising on ultimately result in a sale. So definitely take a look at these, definitely play around with looking at the different attribution paths and different attribution models to help determine where you should increase investments or if there's any spot that it actually makes sense to pull back and reallocate to other channels.